this is James. Thanks so much for tuning in and joining me for the continuation of this viewer requested video series. So if this is your first time here, I'm going to give you a little bit of a recap. So I was contacted by GL, who asked me if I would be willing to showcase the decks in my Kipper card collection. So this is the second installment of this series. In the first one, I talked about the Mystical Kipper and I went through the cards, and so I will be making, or leaving I should say, a link to that video in the description box below if you want to check that out. And so I'm going in the order that I actually purchased each deck and added it to my collection. So the Mystical Kipper was the first, and so this is the second, and in this one I'm showcasing the Fin de Siècle Kipper. It is by Ciro Marchetti. Back in the day when I got it, it was self-published by Ciro then. Now it is available as a mass market version through US Game Systems Incorporated. And so you may also know, if you are familiar with my videos and familiar with me working with Kipper, that this actually was the deck that I used in another video series, and in that one I discussed the meanings that I personally use when I work with Kipper. And this deck was asked to be used because that was also a viewer requested video series, and the person at the time, Carolyn, was very specific about the deck that she wanted me to work with for that series, and so that was the Fin de Siècle. So if you are wanting to see that series, I will also leave a link in the description box below to the playlist of that series. Okay, so now that I've set things up, let's get to the table and take a closer look at the Fin de Siècle Kipper. And here we are with the cards on the table, and just as I said in the opener, this is the Fin de Siècle Kipper. This is the second Kipper deck that I ever got and added to my collection. And so you'll notice that on the left there is a bag that came with the deck, and this is when the deck first came out. It was self-published by Ciro back then, and so it came with a bag, because when he makes decks and you order them directly from him, 9 times out of 10 you'll get a bag to go with it. Now the deck is available as a mass market version through US Game Systems Incorporated, so it comes in a box these days, but when I got the deck it came in this bag. Okay, so now I'm going to move the bag and just come in just a little bit more. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to go through the cards much as I did in the previous video with the Mystical Kipper, and I will offer commentary when I feel it is appropriate in terms of offering some helpful thoughts that I experienced when I worked with this deck that you may benefit from. Okay, so first up we have main male. And I will also note that the backs are monogrammed, so I had the option when I got the deck to have my name on it, so I have my first and middle name. When you get the mass market version, it of course won't be monogrammed, and the back should look a little different from this version. Okay, so next up we have main female, and so you will note that there is a possibility for main male and main female to be facing each other, even though I noticed that the characters in this particular deck more often than not are facing the reader. So that's something worth noting if you are going to be working with directional cues. Okay, so that is main male and main female. Next up we have the marriage card. And what I like about this particular depiction is that the marriage card is a connector card. And so I like the fact that the way the figures are presented in the image, it leads to or blends well with the idea of connection. So that is marriage. Next we have the courtship card, and some of the cards throughout this deck will be renamed. And so in the traditional Kipper deck, this is known as meetings. And just like marriage, this is also a connector card. So that is courtship. Next up we have mature man, also known as good lord or good gentleman. And again, you'll note that he is looking directly at the reader. I'm going to move this card to the side because I want to make a note about this in comparison to the next card, which is Mature Female. And this is also known as Good Lady. Okay, so just like I noted in the Mystical Kipper deck in the previous video, we have the same challenge or problem presented with these two cards as in that deck, in that the characters, there's no way that the characters could be facing each other because they are actually body language facing the same direction. So I didn't know that when I got the deck then. Again, when I got the Mystical Kipper deck in this deck, I was not aware of directional cues. I didn't become aware of them until my next deck, which I will present in the next installment of this series. But that is Mature Female. Next we have Message, which is known as Pleasant Letter or Good News. Next we have False Person. And this one departs from the traditional imagery where there's only one figure on the card. Here we have two. And with the woman with the fan over half her face, the lower half of her face, and the man with the mask over his eyes, the top part of his face, it carries over the idea that the false person can represent something being concealed or something being hidden. But for me, in my experience, this card can represent a masquerade. You know, so the idea of like somebody masquerading as someone else, like pretense or pretending to be somebody else. And I also get this card for actors and actresses. So that is False Person. Next we have Change. And this one is consistent with the directional cue. You want to pay attention to the card to the right of the card in the card, because that shows where things are going in terms of the change. Then we have Journey. And here we have Sudden Wealth. In the traditional Kipper deck, this is gaining a lot of money. And it carries over the gambling imagery that was depicted in the Mystical Kipper. Next we have Privileged Lady, which is known as Rich Girl. And following that, and I'm going to make the same distinction because we have the same challenge just as we did in the Mystical Kipper. The next card is Wealthy Man, which is also known as Rich Good Gentleman. And again, both characters, body language-wise, are facing the same direction, so there's no way that they could be looking at each other. So that might present a problem when you're working with the deck in a more traditional sense and you're wanting to honor or pay attention to potential directional cues. And here we have Message of Concern. So like I've said already, that some of the card names have been changed. This is known as Sad News traditionally. Next we have Lovers, which is Success in Love. And then we have Thoughts, which is known as His Thoughts. So now what I love about the image, and this bore out for me in my own experience with the card, that aside from the meaning of this card being, you know, thinking and planning, you know, analysis, you know, long-term planning goals, I also consider this to be about meditation and contemplation. The image has an artist who looks like he's been working on a particular project. And so for me, this card can literally represent, an artist and creativity. When I have interactions with my brother and I pull this card, it reflects him because he's an artist. He's a visual painter. So I've had this card turn up multiple times when I'm planning on doing something with him in the course of a day. So for me, this card can also represent artists, going with the imagery. Next, we have the gift card, also known as receiving a gift. Next is child, sometimes known as a little child. And here we have coffin, renamed from bereavement or fatality. Moving on, we have house. And family room is next. And this is also known as living room. And here we have official person. In some decks, this is known as military person. Then we have courthouse. The thief card. So now for me, going with the imagery, here we have a pickpocket who looks to be stealing the watch of the man in the middle. And so for me, sometimes this card can come up around issues around time, where you feel like time is being taken away from you, or somebody's stealing your time or robbing you of your time. So again, that particular meaning has just come from my own personal experience working with the deck. Next we have high honors, and the image is quite the departure. This is a 21 gun salute, but it still carries a distinction because that is all about honoring someone or recognizing someone. So that's high honors. Next we have great fortune, the best card in the deck. So like I said in the previous video, this is also known as great happiness in some decks and big luck. Next we have unexpected income, which is also known as unexpected money. And so for me, the meaning of this card based on the image is that it can mean that money is changing hands. Here we have a transfer of funds. So this could represent a loan, a payment of some kind. And in this day and age with electronics and technology, this could be actually a transfer, electronic transfer. An interesting thing to note that sometimes this card can be about household accounts and household expenses. And if you look, there's a blurred image of card 20, which is house in this deck, in the image. So it carries that card over into this one. And I like that. So that is unexpected income. Next we have expectation. And this one follows the directional cue much better, in my opinion, than the mystical Kipper. Because you can clearly see that if you put a card, or whatever the card is here, if you're doing a multiple card reading, this would be what is being anticipated or expected or being waited on, whatever the card is on this side. So I like this in terms of the directional cue. Next we have Imprisonment, which is the prison card. And so the one thing I will say about this card, I like the Mystical Kipper version of prison versus this one, because the prison card can also represent a building, and you don't get that sense with this image. You get the sense of being limited, restricted, or confined, which is also a part of the prison card, but I tend to like the image of seeing a building on the card because it also can represent a building. And then surrounding cards might tell you what type of building it is. So that's the one thing about this card that doesn't entirely work for me, but that is Imprisonment. Next we have Judication, which is also known as Court Person. Next we have Bad Health, which is short illness. And following that we have Despair, which is also known as grief and adversity. Now this particular depiction has come up for me regarding issues around unemployment, like people are looking for work. So that is Despair. Next we have Concern, and traditionally this is known as murky thoughts or gloomy thoughts. This can be one of the most challenging cards in the deck. I liken it to Clouds in Lenormand. So if you're familiar with Lenormand, that would give you a sense of what this card could mean. And I think the naming of it from murky thoughts and gloomy thoughts to concern kind of softens it in a way. But that is Concern. Next we have Occupation. So I really like this image. It still works with the idea about working with your hands, handiwork. But because she's a seamstress, for me this could represent like, somebody who works in the clothing industry or with fashion. So that is Occupation. A couple more. Here we have Pathway, which is typically known as a long way. You get the idea with the long road. And then the final card is called Distant Horizons. This is known traditionally as Hope Big Water. And so you really don't get the sense with the water because the image has a boat in the air. So I tend to think of like, your aspirations, because this card talks about your hopes, your wishes, your dreams. And that could be why the boat and the anchor are in the air as opposed to being on the ground in the water. You're not being anchored in. It's kind of something that we are aspiring to, looking up to, because it's in the sky. And so with that, that is the Fin de Siècle Kipper. And on that note, I'm going to go ahead and wrap this video up. This is James Himm Mitchell, thanking you for sharing the space here with me as I am continuing to walk through the decks in my Kipper card collection. And so as I wrap up, I just want to say thank you again, and I hope that you have a wonderful day. And I look forward to seeing you in the next installment of the series. And until then, take care.